Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Follow Your Passion. Let me introduce my guest of today. His name is Zane Landin. Zane is a recent graduate from Cal Poly Pomona with a Bachelor of Science in Communication and Public Relations. He's from Chino, California. He has interned at places like USAID, NASA, and General Motors. He's a mental health and disability advocate, queer rights activist, entrepreneur, and a positive change maker. He identifies as Hispanic, queer, and disabled. He's the founder of Positive Vibes magazine, which is a digital magazine dedicated to telling authentic stories about mental health, wellness, and inspiration. He attended the first ever Mental Health Youth Action Forum in Washington, D.C., where he met President Biden, Selena Gomez, Dr. Murphy, and Dr. Biden. Out of hundreds of applicants, 30 young advocates across the country were selected to advocate for mental health. He's a passionate storyteller who writes for the power of positivity and entrepreneur about wellness, psychology, and culture. He has been featured over 30 platforms like Seek the Joy podcast, Forbes, and Coming from the Heart podcast. He's driven by storytelling and how we can leverage powerful stories to create a more inclusive world for all to thrive. And I'm all about that. Welcome, Zane. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for the wonderful introduction and the invitation to come on today.
Yeah. So Zane, tell me about this inclusion. There's a lot of it almost seems like a hype, that
Yeah.
you have the Me Too abuse, disabilities, people wondering about their own gender. Um, I think it all has to do with labels. People put a certain label on a person and then they start thinking about the label and they forget to look at the whole person themselves. What's your view on that, Zane?
I mean, I will. That's interesting. I will say, for me, struggling growing up, figuring out my identities as well, especially when I bring up the queer aspect, something that you have to find yourself, and even with the support around you. I mean, for some, they have to come to terms if they're Hispanic or if they're a person of color. But being queer was interesting because you had to really figure it out on your own and kind of determine what that meant for you, and you weren't really
Hmm.
sure how people were going to react. And I agree, though. I think that we sometimes can get stuck in the label and stuck in the identity and forget that the identity is just one portion of yourself. Like all the different identities that I hold, all of them are important. Of course, they all hold different importance. Like
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
me having a disability is more important than some of my other identities. But for me, I understand that because I think that it's easy for us to get stuck in the label because maybe for some it was very hard to come to terms with their identity, and so that label is really what defines them. And if that is the case, power to them, but also recognize that every single part of you is important, and everything that makes you up is has importance as well. And so don't forget the other aspects of yourself that make you you, and don't let the label completely define you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's wonderful that you said it. I once saw this motivational speech of I think it was Prince Ia or
Oh,
maybe someone similar, but he said something like, um, when you're driving a car, right? It doesn't say anything about the person behind the wheel. You just see the car, and you have a certain image of the driver, but it isn't the real driver, right? It's all based on the car. And he said you could consider um, the body we live in as being the car, and the soul is the driver of the car. And we don't get to pick our car, right? We just are. We get a car when we arrive at Earth, and we have to deal with it. We have to drive it. We can't change the car, right? We can't change the outside of your personality.
mhm,
But you shouldn't look only at the car. You should look at the driver.
mhm.
And I think that's like a wonderful metaphor, that it's a person inside of the body that's the real personality. It's not the body itself that it has been given at birth.
I've never actually heard that, but I love that because, yeah, I think we tend to focus on the exterior rather than what's inside. And then we can easily kind of forget that we're all human and we all have very similar experiences. Even what we might think is very different, we forget that.
Yeah, exactly. And so tell me about the Positive Vibes magazine. You're the founder of it. What made you decide to create this magazine?
Growing up, I've always had experience with my own personal issues with mental health conditions and just knowing a lot of people who experienced that. And I think many people can describe a moment when they knew someone that died by suicide. So I think that there's not a moment where we're surrounded by mental health. And I think people forget that everyone does have mental health. Not everyone has, mental health condition. That's different. That's something diagnosable. But
Hmm.
everyone has mental health, just as everyone has physical health. Doesn't mean everybody has diabetes or a heart condition, but we still have physical health, and we all have to maintain that. Anyways, I think that the pandemic opened this kind of door to the mental health experience to the point where we were seeing like a mass effect of mental health. I think that, of course, I think everyone goes through something where their mental health, can decline or they experience, symptoms of mental health. But I think the pandemic was really unique because that was something wasn't experienced in a long time, right? Even before it all. And people were dying left and right. And people were losing loved ones. Some people didn't even get to see their loved ones and just had to conclude that they weren't going to. And some haven't even been able to pay their services or do a celebration or a funeral for some of these people. So I think that, the pandemic did a lot. And I think also people were isolated, people were at home, and I think people had to reflect on who they were and they kind of were forced to. It was kind of like they were forced into meditation. Not
Hmm.
exactly a thoughtful meditation, but a place where you were, stuck and you kind of had to come to terms with yourself and people around you. And that's why, maybe there was a time where a lot of stuff was happening and even the great resignation. I think people were having these moments of reflection and they kind of came to realize that they wanted to be treated a certain way. And that's why you saw the great resignation and you're still seeing it today because people deem that they should be treated with respect and they should. Anyways, again, this is all kind of going into the mental health, epidemic that I think is
Hmm.
has been around for a while, and I think that the pandemic just accelerated this mental health disparity that was going on in the country and in the world. And I saw that this again was a unique opportunity because the mainstream media was talking a lot about COVID and a lot about COVID deaths and statistics, which I undeniably was a great thing. A lot of
Hmm.
people needed to be informed about that. But it's something that people that mainstream media was lacking was this storytelling aspect of mental health. And when we were seeing like miles and miles of people experiencing mental health across borders and barriers, and geographically, people experiencing mental health all around, it's just a shame that the mainstream media did not talk about mental health in the way that it should have. And I still don't think it does. I'm seeing more growth. I'm seeing more coverage and more opportunities. But I think that the mainstream media needs to take a leap in sharing the stories of mental health and normalizing the experiences. Because if the pandemic taught us anything, is that we're more similar than we gave credit for. And we all were experiencing something horrible. And mental health is really important for everyone. So that was my inspiration. And what was funny at the time, I was actually in school because like you said, I just graduated, and I was taking a class where we had to create our own publication, and that was the final project. And I decided to create a publication based on that because I thought that that was something that was lacking from the mainstream media, and that's what I wanted to see. And
Hmm.
there are several platforms of mental health, and for me, I wanted to create one what I wanted to see, and so it really started off as that as a project. And then I had my friend review it before I submitted it. And I just kind of had a spark in my mind of why not do something like this? And I chased that. So her and I started the publication and it really just started off with a social media account because that was kind of what I knew. Because at the time that was what I had a job role I was doing with social media work.
Hmm.
And so I was like, this is where we can start. And because everything's virtual, I think that social media is actually helping us stay connected and kind of grounded
Yeah.
and start off with that. And then we just had a few postings and sharing just different stories. And then we were writing some blog posts because we started a website. And then everything changed when we had an actual person reach out that wanted to be interviewed, which was exciting because I didn't think that we were ever going to share the tales and stories of people. That wasn't what it intended to be. So it was always exciting when it completely changed the trajectory of the magazine. And since then, that's all we mostly do. We'll post some blog posts here and there, not really though. It's all about sharing people's experiences, their histories, their journeys, and the work that they're doing for the world. And I've been able to come in contact and meet some of the greatest people I've ever met, and who have these rich stories and are doing such great work, but also have some of the most like traumatic pasts, but have been able to pay it forward for others and be inspirational. And the title is interesting because people ask me like, what does positive vibes have to do with trauma or like, you know, bad history? So some people say, you know, what does that have to do with it? I think positive vibes is what you get to, and you
Mm.
can't get there until you reflect and come to terms with your past. And so
Yeah.
for people to share their story of trauma, or if they've been assaulted, there's a lot of different things that have happened to these people that we've been able to feature, but they've been able to move forward from that and support others, or just support themselves and help their communities. It's a lot of work that they're doing, and it's exciting. So that's what positive vibes really means to me. It's a philosophy, it's a mindset, and it's what you get to when you can move forward with what you've gone through, and how you can use all that for your own healing and others.
Nice. Well, you said a lot of interesting things, Zane. And for instance, I must agree that the whole pandemic and the lockdown, it made people more aware of their mental health, because I believe that a lot of people went to their job, and hide it behind their job. And when they were forced to stay at home, they were confronted with their own environment. They couldn't escape anything. There was no escaping. You had to be at home, and people were more confronted with their own mental challenges. And so it's more acceptable now to talk about it, about your mental health and maybe challenges and issues you had.
Yeah.
And it's what you say, that what I learned during my training was that um, a traumatic event isn't real trauma. It's the memory of the trauma. The event it happened, and it's how you respond to that event which makes it traumatic or not.
Mhm.
Let me explain what I mean. There were during World War II, there were a lot of people in prison, right? And some people survived those camps only because of the positive mindset.
Mhm.
A lot of people went through the same experience. Some became a victim and wouldn't get out of the mental prison, so to speak. And the others, they were survivors. And I think that the mindset is a very important part of that. And what you said, about positive vibes, I truly believe what you said, that once you have uh, dealt with the past, and you move further and you move on, then there's a future for you.
Mhm.
So it's not only um positive stories, but they are real stories about people that have been there and they've survived. They've dealt with their past, and they know there's a future for them. And I think that's very inspirational for the people that are dealing with mental challenges.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And for me, I think it's important to have that mindset, but I understand that not everyone has it. And for people that are trying to figure that out and maybe have a more positive mindset, it's a very hard process. I think
Mm,
we're always succumb to negative vibes or negative energy, especially looking at the news. The news thrives on negativity. And so I think we're always surrounded by that. And there's just so
mm.
many things holding people back, if it's themselves or things they've heard. And so there's a lot of things that people think about and they experience. So I think it's a hard thing. I hope people can come to that, because I'm not there either. I'll be completely honest. I'm always trying to spread positivity, but internally, I'm always struggling myself. And the messages I put out for the magazine actually help me a lot, and stuff that we follow, and hearing the stories that we get to tell, because I still have a problem with tuning into the positivity. I immediately go to negative. And I think a lot of people are like that, but I think
Mm.
it's a long journey onto wellness and finding that positive energy and that mindset.
Oh, definitely. And there will always be challenges, and maybe even roadblocks or issues down the road. But as long as you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. There is a positive outcome, and other people have been there, they've done it, and they have this positive life again. There's still hope for a lot of people. And just what you said, you're let's say down to earth, you're real, you're human, and you're sharing that, and that I think a lot of people will resonate with that.
Yeah.
And it's also the world is not perfect, right? And you're showing that, but you're actually a great showcase for the magazine. You just what you said, you're still dealing with some issues,
Mhm.
but there are learnings there for you. You learn from it, you grow, you develop yourself, and over time it will become easier. And at a certain moment in time, you forget the bad history because you are in this positive vibe yourself,
Mhm.
and it will go easier down the road. And seeing this positive development helps you, but it also it helps other people that they are understood. If you can show compassion to them, and you know what they're going through, and you're showing empathy to them, and you're sharing the stories, how you dealt with things, it will enforce them and empower them as well.
I agree with that. I think that there's a ripple effect that happens when someone shares their story and shares the real raw journey, not the filtered version that we might see in the media, but like an actual account of what happened or what they were going through. Especially when you hear success stories, I really appreciate when you hear a good success story, but they tell the story behind it. A lot of people forget that. I think that a lot of people are inclined to think that people find success that they were privileged, and some people, started ahead of others. But I think that there's a huge amount of people that have worked really hard to get where they are, and it's easy to forget that because we see their lifestyle, we see how they live, we see their success. We forget that they definitely had to sweat and cry during the process. And I love when people who are successful share that story because a lot of people in the audience that may be talking to maybe at that point where they want to seek success and maybe they don't know what the success means to them because I think it's something you have to define yourself. But to hear that it wasn't easy and I mean, any successful person, you see them go through so much rejection and setbacks, but I think those are important. And a lot of them would say that that actually helped them propel them for a better future and made them more resilient. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's great. I've interviewed other guests in my podcast, and I'm probably not correctly quoting one of my guests, but he said that entrepreneurship is like going from failure to failure without losing the positive mindset, something like that. It's not always it's not a paved way. You're bound to hit roadblocks, but as long
Yeah.
as you know that there will be some dead end streets you go into, but at least you learn from that. That you don't have to return to that again, right? And you've grown, and you can take other shortcuts, and it's it's the journey, and it's if you know why you're doing what you're doing, it makes you persevere.
No, I love the failure to failure because I think not everyone can be. I think everyone has the intelligence and maybe the drive to be an entrepreneur, but I don't think everyone can be. I think you have to have like thick skin and you have to expect that there will be failures because 99.9% of businesses or entrepreneurs do fail. And I think that's people, it's a hard thing to come to terms with. And it's hard to see because you put so much effort into something and to see it not go through, it's hard. And so I understand why entrepreneurship is a hard field for anyone. Um, yeah.
Yeah, but it's I truly believe that it's the passion you feel for something
Mhm,
that it fuels your intrinsic motivation,
mhm.
right? If you're doing it for an external motivation, it's hard to keep on going. But if
Yeah.
you feel it from within and you feel like it's something you should pursue, and you believe in your own powers, in your own strength, that you will achieve what you're here for, so to speak. You will succeed, but it won't be like an overnight success.
Right.
That there will be some struggles. It's a journey. It's almost like a lifelong journey.
Yeah, I think people. Yeah, I agree, and I think people get hung up on not being that number one trend, or getting focused on the numbers. But I think you're absolutely right with the if you have a passion that you're always going for. Let's say for me, let's say I don't do the magazine forever, or I do something else, but I still have the back end of mental health and as a passion of mine. So I'm always going for the same vision. It's always going to be about mental health or storytelling or whatever it is. It's still
Yeah,
the same issue that I'm passionate about, and I think that it's easy to get stuck in the numbers and the success. But I think when that happens, you're kind of losing sight of yourself. Always remember your why and why you're doing it, especially when you're feeling those doubts. And even write it and have a huge poster board of it, of what your why is. So you're always seeing it, and it's always motivating you.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's what you said. The magazine doesn't need to be the end station for you. But it's the passion behind it. It's about making things aware that that it's okay to talk about it, to talk about those challenges, and that you have some positive vibes around you that will help you get through. You don't need to do this on your own. There are other people walking the same they're traveling the same journey as you are, right?
Mhm.
And if they can do it, so can you. You're not the exception. And I think that's a big part of your I would almost say mission as well, your purpose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So do you have any um let's call it a success story from somebody that has been reach out to you from what you've meant for that person?
A success story that I've heard.
Yeah, maybe somebody that was touched by the magazine, or thank you for acknowledging something that they couldn't talk about, or
Oh,
that gave you this positive vibe. This is the reason why I do what I do.
I actually interviewed a photographer. His story hasn't been released yet,
Mm-hmm.
but and he's gained a good success recently. He's been able to photograph celebrities across the world that have been in Los Angeles, and it's pretty amazing. Not every photographer gets the opportunity, and he's done a lot of hard work. But one thing he said to me was, and he said he's never mentioned this in another interview. He said that there was a time where he was suicidal every day, and I didn't know that. And
Mm.
it's hard to forget that people experience this, and mental health is so normal. The way suicide and the way mental health is treated is so taboo. And when you hear suicide, you think, oh, that's such a rare oddity. No, actually, it's probably very normal. I think most people have had suicidal thoughts. It's just very hard to say, very hard, because it's scary, to
Yeah.
think that you wanted to die or you didn't want to live anymore. Everyone has a different reason for why they think that. But when he told me that, I was like, that was a success story for me because it was like I'm doing something right, and I'm happy that someone was there, that they felt safe enough to share that, and that we're always trying to go into the vulnerability of people, and that the interviews we do isn't just about the craft or what their success is, but what they experience every day and the real truth to who they are, not just what they're producing or what they're taking pictures of, the real story behind the person. Like we said at the beginning with the car, there's a person and a story behind what's the mobility, the car. And it's not necessarily like a huge success, but just the idea that we're sharing something so vulnerable, and I think a lot of people resonate with that.
Oh, I definitely do. And it's um I think that those interviews are very important for a lot of people, because and it all has to do with, let's call it the public opinion, right? That it's wrong to have suicidal thoughts. And of course, when you have it, it's very hard, because if you're considering taking your life, if you don't have it, it's very hard to imagine how that would be. But hearing somebody that has had those thoughts
Mhm.
and is now successful in their own career or their own role of the entrepreneurship, it can make a difference for a person listening to that or reading it. That, oh wow, uh, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one that's having those thoughts,
Yeah.
but there's still light at the end of the tunnel. He has overcome it, and maybe sharing such a story will inspire others to start thinking differently as well. That there is a possibility to overcome it, right? And that's um I just a quote came to me, when you're at your lowest, the only way is up. So there is a way out of it. And sharing such stories, I think that's very powerful, Zane. And that's indeed what you said, that you've created the environment where a person um, is sharing this vulnerability. That's amazing. And that's exactly the reason why you do what you're doing.
Yeah. And like I said before, the ripple effect, like you just described, that's kind of what I meant about the ripple effect, that when someone shares this honest truth about them, you have someone across the world come to that realization that they're not alone. Even though there's what, over 7 billion people on this planet, rationally, it's you could just think there really are people like me out there. But for some reason, we get so bogged in our own minds that we're the only one experiencing this. And we forget our neighbors are probably experiencing it. But how do we actually open that dialogue? And it all starts with just sharing your truth. If it's sharing it with yourself, writing it down, telling your family, and then more stories are heard. And again, now the mainstream media picks this up. Now they're talking about mental health. And that's where I think you're going to see real change happen, when you have these like natural conversations and these stories told. And then, like you said, people are inspired and people take action in their own life because they realize this person may be actually going through a lot worse than what I am. Now I need to make a change in my life, or I need to be honest with myself and tell someone I need help. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And it just reminded me, I think I mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation as well, that I think that a great example is this whole Me Too movement,
Mhm.
right? About female harassment, and somebody opened her mouth and made it public and spoke about it. And another person said, yeah, me too. I had the same. And it became a whole movement globally, right?
Mhm.
Or like another movement, Black Lives Matter, right?
Mm.
An incident happens and somebody speaks up, and suddenly you see starting a movement all over the world. Talking about the ripple effect, like you said.
And gosh, that movement, grows so much because people really want to talk about this. I think that the person who's first to shares has such courage, because you see people taking action and you see a movement growing, and people have wanted to talk about this because that movement was so valuable, and it was so needed in the world, like Me Too or the Black Lives Matter movement. It's so imperative, but it really starts with that one person, because I don't blame people who don't speak up, because it can be incredibly hard. It can be traumatizing. You may be in a place where you can't speak up because who knows how people are going to react. So I think that I commend people who are the first to speak up, and I also commend them because it can be very dangerous. It can be really scary, but it's clear that people have this shared desire to talk about this, because you see these movements growing, and especially when you talk about inclusion at the beginning, inclusion is so hype right now because for the longest time it was at an all-time low. And I think again, the pandemic allowed people to reflect on disparities and inequities and all that stuff. And now that we're coming out of the pandemic, basically, now people don't want that anymore. Now they're going to take action for themselves. Now they're leaving their jobs or they're starting their own things. There's so many entrepreneurs that were born from the pandemic. I think because for one, some maybe need to make money because maybe they lost their jobs, but also people just found this like hidden treasure of creativity that they never knew they had. I think people forget that even though the pandemic was a horrible instance or this time period, it still was able to uplift a lot of people and change a lot of things that we didn't get to see. And it's unfortunate a pandemic had to do that. That's just kind of how things go. An unfortunate
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
has to
yeah.
happen, then change happens. That's just kind of how it goes. But I'm glad that the pandemic actually accelerated some good in the world that we needed.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think at such times that creativity gets a boost, and you start thinking about other things, and the moment you start taking full responsibility of your own situation is the moment that people decide, why I'm not trying the entrepreneurial journey,
Mhm.
what do I have to lose? And they start and they find out they're actually quite good at it. Well, not everybody, but the jewels that are getting out there, they're great, and they're actually doing great.
Yeah, and I think fear holds people back. And my advice is just try it. And you don't have to invest $1 million into your new company. The first thing you can do is just research what's out there, or even
Yeah,
talk to someone who's in the industry and you're like, I'm thinking of starting something. Talk to a fellow entrepreneur. There's ways to network and find mentors or people who are willing to help you, because you'd be surprised there's a lot of people willing to help you. You just kind of have to ask for what you want and kind of set those intentions when you go into that space. But
yeah,
I always implore people just to try it. And again, you don't have to take this huge leap, especially if you have a job already, if you have a family, maybe you can take that leap, but just try it out and just take that small step, and you never know where it's going to take you.
yeah. If you reflect on your own life, like a few years ago, would you have ever imagined you would be at the place you're right now?
No, no question about it at all. What's funny was I had a job on campus, the social media job, and it was all about entrepreneurship. And for the longest time, I was like, this is not for me. I mean, I'm happy to be in this space and doing the work for this department, but entrepreneurship isn't for me. I think it's too hard, too unpredictable. But I was, again, it's interesting where we find our inspiration, and I was always inspired by mental health. But that all changed when the pandemic happened. And I also don't think I would have done it without that class assignment. So sometimes the inspiration you have may come from something that you had to do, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be this like big moment where you had this revelation happen. For me, it was like I was kind of forced to do an assignment, and I wanted to continue it because I thought it was something that I wanted to see, and it was. So I really
Yeah.
couldn't imagine it. And even you mentioned at the beginning, one of the most rewarding experiences was what you talked about in my bio, which was the Mental Health Youth Action Forum. Without the magazine, I wouldn't have gone there because without the magazine, all the people I've talked to and the knowledge I've gained about mental health, because I knew about the community, with my personal identity with it, but I didn't know too much about it. And the magazine really pushed me to become a better advocate. And then when I saw the Mental Health Youth Action Forum, I applied for it, and I was just fortunate to be selected. Out of hundreds, they chose 30, and they flew us to DC where I met the president, like of the United States. Something that I never ever thought that would happen ever. I imagine something like that happening, like, but I always thought it'd be like years of work, maybe my 50s, where I'm older. And even if that
Yeah.
was the case, it was just going to the White House or meeting a senator. Never in a million years would I've ever thought that. So like I said, always embrace the uncertainty, kind of like what the pandemic taught us, because you never know where it's going to take you.
I think that's a great quote as well, saying what you just said. Embrace the uncertainty. I think that's very important when you're considering entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you would be able to look forward like 3, 4, 5 years from now, any idea where you would be? Or do you have any vision where you want to be?
Since I'm a recent graduate, I'm looking for my first time actual entry level full time job. So that's where I would want to be, working full time for a company that's doing good, especially as it has to do with mental health and disability. And I would love to work at a tech company like Google or Microsoft. So that's my dream. But with the other aspects of myself, I just want to be a better advocate. I just want to share more stories. I want to get more voices out there. And whatever that means in 3 to 5 years, even if that means starting a podcast or, like branching out in different areas of storytelling that I haven't before. But that's my main goal is in 3 to 5 years, just keep holding on to that vision that I've always had with the magazine, just share these authentic stories and hopefully create more of a ripple effect.
Yeah, wow. And I think that's a great journey you will be on, Zane. And who knows, maybe you're going to be an inspirational speaker on stages. You know, people pay you to be an inspiration and to inspire the audience and let people know there's more out there than just this misery and negative thoughts. You know, there are positive vibes and you can come over it. And who knows what the world will bring you.
Who knows? That really is a dream, though, to be paid to speak.
Exactly. Well, just hold on to that dream, you know. Who knows? Someday it will. Well, I won't say someday, one day it will come.
Thank you.
Great. Zane, if you could share any other tip or little piece of wisdom with the audience to inspire them with regards following your passion or entrepreneurship or whatever, what would it be?
I mean, I definitely mentioned the chasing the uncertainty, and you never want to, like, you never want to play it safe. I think there was a long time where I thought I would, and find a job and kind of settle. And I think a lot of people want that because a lot of people want that stability. But I think life is kind of boring that way. And I would say take a risk in yourself, whatever that means. I always say, again, it's not the biggest risk, but even if it's just turning your camera on, attending a lecture, asking a question, you never know what that's going to lead to. Just take a risk in yourself and just put yourself out there. Because again, you don't know who you're going to meet. You hear all the time. I mean, even models, that they were just discovered because someone just saw them. Someone just saw them walking across the street and then they just poach them and say, I think you would be a great model, and then become a supermodel. Again, that's a little different because they had no control of that. That just happened. But again, always put those intentions out there, and whatever you're interested in, just chase your passion. And I know some people can't do that because they have a family or a job, but do something small for yourself then. Maybe maybe not become a professional painter that you can be right now, but maybe try it or try drawing because that's what you've missed. Again, it's not about chasing that huge dream. That's the end goal if that's what you want. But try and make those small steps so you can actually lead to that. It's not 0 to 100 like people think, especially when you hear success stories. You think for them they just happen to come across success from 0 to 100. No, again, there was a huge growth. There was a staircase they had to walk up, and it was hard. And so I think that when you have those moments where it is hard, just remind yourself of why you're doing it and why you're passionate about it. And if you want to
Yeah.
continue, I encourage you to do so.
Great advice. Great advice, Zane. Thank you. So if people want to know more about you or get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Sure, I'm always active on social media. Find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, my main platforms, and it's my full name. That's basically the handles. So, and the magazine is Positive Vibes Magazine, and it's positivevibesmag.com, one word. And then Positive Vibes Mag is the Instagram handle. And if you're interested in being featured, please let me know.
Nice. Great. Zane, I love talking to you. I think it's a very important subject to talk about. And you're truly an advocate for that. And yeah, let's see where the journey brings you and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.